Bless up for tuning in to Project Cheney. Magic happens when you question everything. Conspirituality becomes reality, weirdness is welcomed, and it's okay to change your mind. Big up yourself.
Hey, all you beautiful, sexy people. Welcome back to another episode of Project Cheney. On this episode, I am lucky enough to be joined by Daniel from the Know Thyself Podcast. But before we get into all that, I figured I would talk to you a little bit about what's been going on with me this week. I have been off work. And so I have sat around my house and had to do some chores and things like that. I've gotten to talk to some really great people, some good friends, but really just took some time to myself, relaxed, maybe found a new TV show that I have to tell you about actually. It's called it's called Motherland, Fort Salem. Are you surprised? It's a little witchy, and it's very patriotic, my two favorite things. So I won't give anything away by setting up that it is kind of a parallel timeline where witches battle all over the world to keep humans safe. The United States is motherland, and Salem is where the witches go and train. And they go through all sorts of different kind of witchy things. Some of it's kind of interesting with how true it is to form of stuff I've looked up, different symbols that they use with obviously Mason and Kabbalah and old Hindu stuff. It's pretty. I even like what they do with history, and they take events that, if you're a history nerd, that are true to form, but they make it like a witch battle. So if you are looking for a new show, I am probably on the fourth episode, season 1. And there's only 2 seasons. Some people want a whole bunch out there. They're just starting the second season now. And it gives me, it's not quite True Blood, HBO Showtimey, but it's a little risque. I guess that's kind of normal. Maybe it's like CW level of show. Is the CW even around anymore? Yeah. So Motherland. That is not a paid promotion yet. What else has happened? There's been so many bigger things to talk about than my new favorite TV show. You also hear it come up on the show a lot that I wanted to talk, and maybe I've even asked people what the Schumann resonance is. And if you don't know at all, I guess it's kind of the Earth's heartbeat. I was going to read a definition of the Schumann resonance, and then I realized when reading it that, I'm not that great at reading sometimes. I'm not great at pronunciation sometimes. Is it McAfee? Is it McAfee? Is it tomato? Is it 100 monkeys? Is it 1,000? Sometimes I know a lot of information, but I don't know the date or the name. Is it conservator? Is it servitor? Oh, Britney's conservator. Servitor is magic. Oh, okay. What's that word in the front? What's the conservator? What's con? Anyways, yeah. So sometimes I have a lot of knowledge, but I'm not even trying to pretend that I know it all. And then there's ways like philosophy. I love philosophy. And even with this conversation with Daniel, I'm not even going to try to pretend I'm in the realm of knowledge this guy is. And I just want to stay humble with what I don't know and maybe what I'm never going to fully grasp. Like even the date 1776, it feels ironed in my brain now, but I don't know when it got there. I don't know. It doesn't seem like something I knew when I was a kid. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So the Schumann resonance, we talk about it a lot. That's the Earth's heartbeat. It's kind of been off the chain, and I don't know if it's true or not. I don't know anything about it. The Schumann's like gematria to me. Like, it's not my tool I necessarily use, but since I've been looking at it, every single time it goes white, I need to nap. I'm exhausted. I am beat up. So if you're a person that's into the what is it, the magnetic field of the ionosphere, blah, blah, blah. I can't even remember what words tried to enter my brain that I'm like, too smart, turn away. So I feel like my symbol is like, oh, okay, the Earth's breathing or something. And maybe we make it, maybe it makes us, maybe we work together and do the opposite. I don't know, but that's happening. Oh, so I brought up John McAfee. Is it the Irish in me? I want to make him up. He is the guy who, if you ever had a virus scan on your computer, you've probably seen his name our whole lives. And if you get something virus scanned, it has to go through the filter of the virus scan to make sure the document doesn't have a quote unquote virus on it. Isn't it funny how this word keeps coming up? Virus, virus, virus. Virus in your computer, virus in your body. Why is Bill Gates always involved? So this guy with the OG virus scan, apparently a lot of governments still to this day use this software. And who knows if he had a back door? Who knows if he ever needed one to get into the OG virus scan, that he was just pulling all these government officials and creepy stuff. It sounds like kind of a WikiLeaks level dump. They've been after this guy forever. And so he ended up in a Spanish prison, and I might be a little off here, I think in Spain, and then they were going to like extradite him to America for like tax evasion. I don't know, whatever. He was in this cell. He totally Epstein's, so he kills himself in this cell, and it's all John McAfee didn't kill himself type vibes. But he apparently had a kill switch, which a kill switch is kind of like an internet code of numbers, letters, a picture, something that once it comes out, the dump of this like insurance policy almost on your life, that you're like, this is going to get released. So apparently he has whack tattooed on his arm, and somehow that's an embedded kill switch type thing that other people know. And I guess we'll soon find out if any of this comes to pass, but it's a pretty big deal, and it is right along the same date and time, because nothing seems to be a coincidence, as Britney Spears, for the first time speaking for herself at her conservator trial. And you guys, I don't know if you've listened to that thing, but I mean, whatever. It's Britney Spears, but we've all kind of grown up with this caged bird watching this. If you believe in anything like an MK Ultra or brainwashing or human trafficking or any of this type stuff, I don't know how this can't compel you, because we've all watched it and been complacent and taken part in it and our whole lives. And somewhere, apparently she has a $60 million fortune. This is just from that thing. And I'm like, did I mishear that? They take 8 gallons. I don't know why this is the number one thing. And there's a bunch of horrible stuff in the 22 minutes that she spoke. They take 8 gallons of blood from this woman a week. What in the fuck? 8 gallons? Could this be real? I'm like, I don't know. Did she say a month? I don't know. And, she has an IUD. That's the one. Is that the bomb? I always get the bomb and the birth control mixed up. But she has one of these in her that her conservator won't allow her to take out, so she cannot have a child. She cannot hire her own attorney because she cannot have any rights to her funds. She cannot hire, or she has to go to like 3 therapists. She has to constantly be evaluated. She has a staff of like 20 people that see her naked all the time. Like, the amount of privacy. And she says over and over again how like humiliating it is to have people that she pays tell her what to do and see her in this way. And she isn't allowed to make any decisions for herself. And hearing her voice in this thing, it sounds like the Britney we used to know. Everybody is like, that's not the real her, or that's a clone her, or that's a man, or whatever they've said about this weird version of her we've been watching on Instagram. But it sounds like, you even hear when she gets upset, like her Louisiana accent come out a little bit, and she gets a little country, and her voice is a little deeper. It doesn't sound like the whole, like that little girl who talks about Project Rose. It doesn't sound like that weird shit. She doesn't put that on. And you just feel the sadness in her voice that she has been imprisoned for like 13 years. And she even says, these 20 people are on my payroll. They all tell me what to do. And this conservatorship relies around my family on whether or not they say I'm capable of taking care of myself. And they are all pretty much on my tit. I fucking am their financial support for all these people in my life. So it behooves them to keep me trapped. And she says this is only akin to human trafficking. And it really is. It really reminded me of down in Florida when all those quote unquote rub and tug, and the media tried to make light of it because it was Robert Kraft. But when all those parlors got shut down on the coast of Florida, those women were trapped. They took their passports and their cell phones and they lived at those parlors, and it was horrific. It wasn't just a rub and tug massage parlor where these women went home at night. And it's kind of like Britney. She says her whole house is set up like a rehab center. Like she felt like she was forced to have to do her last tour. Anyways, it's horrible. And it's probably all for Loosh, but free Britney, right? Free motherfucking Britney. We're here. And the timeline I'm in, Britney Spears is free. And I think it's not just going to be about her father and mother. The amount of atrocities that Disney kid knows about Hollywood, she wants to be free to speak about it. So we'll see. Yeah, and I talked to you about the Schumann, and I talked to you about Motherland, and I talked to you about Britney, and we talked about crazy John McAfee, tomato. I don't know why that's such a word that's bothering me. And hopefully today we get the Arizona election results. I feel like every timeline I wake up on, they're 3 days away. So I don't know if we'll ever get there. I'm like the coyote chasing the roadrunner with those Arizona audit results. And maybe you guys are too. Maybe you don't care. If you are a fan of Daniel, you probably don't care about anything I just talked about. So let me, on the simple scale, for the classes I took of philosophy in college, I never took it seriously. I always felt like I learned the philosophies. I logically heard them, but I never felt them before. I never thought outside of the box of thinking about them. I just thought they were kind of cut and dry, or what's the fucking point? And they frustrated me in a way. Even though I was in philosophy, there's certain philosophies that are deeper, and everything kind of is a philosophy. And now I have this really wonderful like watercolor way that I look at it, and I don't have such a cement shoe way, but I even think that my philosophy of all this life is a little more watercolor and a little less cement shoe. And I feel like I owe part of that resurgence in philosophy to Daniel and the Know Thyself podcast. And his show does something beautiful where they not only take hermetic ideas and just ancient Plato's ideas or Hermes's ideas or, just these famous philosophers you heard about. They're also doing stuff where they're breaking down the Old Testament of the Bible. And that's the philosophy of stuff now that I'm learning all these religions and allowing my logic to flow with my heart a little more with all these religions, and realizing there's this beautiful peace in all of them. You really need to have a philosopher's mindset when you're doing it, because everything isn't so literal. It's more beautiful than that. And so Daniel has a really beautiful mind and a beautiful way of kind of flowing with things I used to look at like really brutal cement structures. I see them like more organic now. And yeah, I hope you like this interview. If you want to find anything Daniel, make sure you check out the Know Thyself podcast. And you can follow him on Instagram, where he is always posting some pretty amazing stuff. And I'm sure all of the links I will put in the show notes. And I implore you, that's my word of the day, implore you to go find Daniel. And I insist that you stick around and listen to this interview. Love you guys. Have a great week. Oh, and if you're one of Daniel's fans or one of the Know Thyself podcast fans and you're here, thank you for humoring me and sitting through my Britney combo. XOXO. Hey, you guys, welcome back to Project Cheney. And I am super lucky to have somebody I consider like a philosophy mastermind with me today. And I have Daniel from the Know Thyself podcast. How are you, Daniel?
I'm doing so well, especially being here with you today. So I'm so excited as well. So doing fantastic.
Oh, I am so excited to your whole podcast, and even an interview that we did in the past was actually something that broke philosophy out of my college logic and into something that was more tangible and like important. Like it was no longer this like playtime thing that I heard. I realized how important it was still now in my life that I was dealing with.
Oh, fantastic. That's amazing. That's good philosophy is all about application. And I think that's where we kind of lose touch with it in modern education and kind of the realm we see it in the universities, because it's like this separate thing. Like it's this outside thing that you just more discuss about and kind of throw chairs at each other about and like argue whose philosophy is better. But it really doesn't come down to application. And that's really where a true philosophy lies. So yeah, when you start kind of looking at it at that realm of like, oh, I can actually incorporate this into myself, it takes like a whole new level, and it's a whole new different connection. And so I completely agree with you. That's it makes it a much more special subject.
I've found meditation now with reintroducing philosophy to myself. I can sit alone. Loneliness is harder for me to come by just because of I feel lonely sometimes, but I also feel presence of myself, being able to question this stuff in such a way of like, if the tree falls in the forest, how many ways can we talk about the tree falling in the forest? Where it used to just be 1-2 answers in my college brain, and I thought I got it. But now I am like, holy shit, you could really attach almost every philosophy to this tree falling in the forest.
Right. Absolutely. And that's what it does. That's one of the great things too, is, a lot of times it's even in the spiritual progress and this kind of path that everybody's going through. A lot of times it's not so much the answers we get, but the new questions we ask. And it's not so much we're looking to get answers from these questions, but just how when we really advance ourselves and kind of go through this alchemical process and we go down these like kind of spiritual expansion, it's not so much we get the answers to the questions we used to have. We're just now asking different questions. And that's sometimes how we're asking questions really kind of fuels our desire in life and where our direction goes. So if our questions are small, based on our environment, very isolated just to a narrow mindset, our desire for life and expansion isn't going to develop. So the deeper we get at asking questions, which is kind of what you were just speaking on, really kind of is that fire that guides your life, because that's where your direction and that's where your desire is going. Um, so it really opens up those doors for expansion. So it's so funny when we talk about this, like, this evolution we all go through. It's really not just so much in just finding answers, it's asking, deeper and bigger questions.
And it does something to this perfect computer of our brain. Once starting to ask myself questions and stop letting my ego feel comfort in all the answers of everything, and just to break it the second I thought I knew the answer, to allow myself to break it again. The second I thought I knew the answer again, allow myself to question it from a totally different question, because it's not just a black or white or yes or no. It's all the questions in between. And I was also finding simple questions was how I was getting people to get past their own cognitive dissonance. Like just being like, if you had a dragon, what color would that dragon be? Have you ever flown in your dreams? What's your superpower? Like the stuff we used to ask each other when we were 12 was the way that I could get my friends that were completely trapped in this third dimension to start playing in bigger philosophical ideas. But it was just asking these simple kid questions that, break down. It's like getting their head to playtime again. But the questions are so important, maybe more important than the answers.
Right. Because, what do you do when you're a young kid? What are you always doing? You're just asking questions, and you're always just firing questions right now. Like I was just spending time with my niece and nephew, and it's just, one of my youngest one is at that 4 or 5 age, and she loves life. And what is she always doing? Asking questions all the time. Just so curious, and that desire to see what's around that corner. Where as I see the kind of age evolution, and the older ones who are kind of more attached to their technology, a little bit more sedentary now, like 9 and 10 and 11, that question desire is already kind of starting to diminish. And then you can see how it kind of just slowly starts to dissolve. And then we get calcified as adults, and we don't even ask questions about anything, not even ourselves, but even the outside world. Like whatever's happening in the outside world, everybody just kind of accepts it for what it is, because they kind of separate themselves from asking questions entirely, which is kind of a fascinating thing to think about.
The question, somewhere the question asker became dumb somewhere. And I would even say in a short amount of time, I've watched it happen in my adult life, where it used to be a very normal thing that you could ask and change your mind. We loved that about people. People could be fluid and take in more information and grow from that. Somewhere in the last maybe 15, 20 years, it was like you're weaker for asking questions. It must be like that 24-hour news cycle. Like that, yes. Here's a bunch of facts, and if you don't know these facts, you're wrong. And it's like, how much stuff is actually fact?
Right.
Like, what's fact? What is that word?
Right. Especially when you have to repeat it so often. Usually if it's a fact and you just say it once, it kind of sticks, so, and they just have to keep saying it over and over. So you're like, man, I don't know about any of these things that they're saying. So yeah.
The truth does resonate different.
Absolutely. It hits. Truth hits.
And sometimes it does hurt if you're living on the opposite side. I mean, I'll speak for myself personally, where for my own shadow work of things that I think even the word shadow work, when I first heard it, caused me to have shadow work of just hearing that word. I was like, what the fuck? You don't know about no shadow work. Like, what's this shadow work? I'm fine. I don't have any shadows. And it was like the second that you even acknowledge the shadows, they're like, hi, friend, we've been waiting.
Yes, absolutely.
It's so funny. So usually the first question I start out with is, who's God to you right now? Who or what is God to you right now?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. God to me is, and I'm actually very comfortable, especially in the podcast, I use the word God, but it's the universal life force. It's everywhere in everything. So God to me is very much that the life force behind everything. And it's kind of hard for me because to put God in a box is impossible, because not only is God in the box, he's the box, and he's the space around the box. So I definitely, it's not a it's definitely just kind of it's probably my biggest quest is kind of to get a deeper understanding of who God is and what God is. But that's kind of where we're going back to that, what the first thing we were talking about with the questions. That's really something, as my relationship with that universal life force and that energy has kind of developed. That's very much been getting to know God, has been asking the right questions of myself and of like kind of the universe and everything. And I really feel like that reconnecting with that childhood question asking is God. So, God is kind of, it's that desire for information, it's your imagination. So I do think we have a personal experience with God. It's not just on the outside of us, because I feel that we are made in creation, so we partake in creation. So if we're made from the creator, we can partake in creation, and we can see that in the whole elements of our lives, with even just our ability to manifest, our ability to think, feel, act. The perennial philosophy, the understanding, like symbolism is just understood through all cultures, and it pervades even the public school system. Like, even if somebody is indoctrinated, educated, they still can understand and see a symbol and actually start to perceive it very easily of what it actually truly means. So yeah, I'm sorry, that might have been a long answer to that question, but I love the question. So I would say that would be kind of my connection with God right now.
Do you have a faith in God or a knowing in that energy?
So there is, in the process of kind of like ancient alchemy, there was always the leap of faith. So the leap of faith is it's when you start question beyond the five senses of reality. So you understand the five senses and you understand the physical sciences. And so there comes to a point when you can only answer so many questions with the physical sciences. So the alchemists of the past really started kind of looking beyond that realm, and they were very much
real quick,
kind of,
what is an alchemist? This word comes up a lot on my show. I feel like you're the perfect one to explain it.
Yeah, and it's a great question. And what's so cool about it is alchemy really doesn't start, we can't really even put our finger exactly where it started. Probably Babylon, Egypt, ancient China had alchemy, ancient Hindu religion had alchemy. So alchemists have been this all-pervading information. And really what alchemy comes down to is it's the science of transmutation. So almost like the science of transformation. And it really kind of came down to, and it's funny because a lot of the things the alchemists used to get laughed about, now that we're going through all of these, quantum physics, we're actually validating what these alchemists have been saying since Egypt in a lot of different things. But what they looked at was the process of turning lead into gold. And lead being not just the physical element, like not just the physical metal, but lead just being that heavy, dark aspect of life and going through the seven process to get it to gold. And the idea that everything goes through that evolution because everything's based off of carbon. So carbon is almost your lead, and you can transfer anything to gold, but not just physical. That also works within the mental realm. So changing your brain from lead into gold, and then changing your heart from lead to gold. So it's a process that actually happens inward, and then it starts from the inward and it moves out, because your manifestations now are done in gold. So your environment kind of turns into gold. So it was always more of an allegory, taking it from physical lead to gold. And that was kind of more to divert people from persecuting them in the kind of during the Christian realm of the Middle Ages. And in the past, it was just kind of used as an allegory.
So
But
they were like, don't worry, kings and popes, don't kill us. We're just trying to
don't
make
kill
gold
us.
for you. And then they're like,
Yes.
okay, you're allowed to do it.
Right. Absolutely. And, and people would try to kidnap them because they thought that they could actually make gold. But some actually physically, we believe, kind of did, because there's just these alchemists that were kind of poor. And then they got really, really wealthy. But all of those ones just did amazing things with their wealth, like made a bunch of hospitals for poor people. They all just put it back into the poor people, especially back then, that lower income population, because it wasn't even income back then. It was a completely different economic system, were so poverty rich. So kind of a cool situation there. But yeah, so that's what alchemy is. It's just this process of transformation, but we see it in every culture. So ancient China had the study, Egypt, of course, had the study. So it's just this fascinating process, and it's the 7 steps. And, we see this even in the days of the week, like the 7 days of the week, 7 days of creation. We're always kind of seeing, this is why Harry Potter was written in 7 books, and it was all about alchemy. So you kind of start it's all about those numbers, and it's very based in numerology, astrology, and the tarot.
Do they kind of do that stuff like Harry Potter? It's been something that's like for the past few months, I've just been thinking, did they write that book in committee just to bury what we are naturally drawn to, like this stuff from the aether that we're going to pull on eventually and come to the truth of it again? But now when we all start to look it up and put in the Philosopher's Stone, we find Harry Potter only, and it's really hard to find any. It's almost like a rewriting of history in fiction.
Yes, absolutely. And, and it's such an interesting thing because Harry Potter's very much what you would call a gray situation. So you have light aspects coming in on that's trying to kind of waken you up and show you the alchemical process, and it's kind of hidden within those books. But then you have the dark, who's really just capitalizing on the money and the energy control, and hoping that you don't go down the road of finding the Philosopher's Stone. So you almost have these like 2 energies coming together, and that's what kind of makes a gray. And when you're really looking at major Hollywood and the whole aspect of pretty much any kind of major entertainment, you're really looking on the scale of gray on entertainment. There's some films that can come out with that are almost like pure light. That's kind of like their rarities, like a Terrence Malick film, like something that is just completely kind of untouched and just kind of really beautiful. And he was able to have complete control over the situation. But then there's films that completely go all the way to the dark, and it's just destructive information for the psyche, destructive information for the heart. It's all negative programming. So yeah, I kind of see like the Harry Potter series is like a gray, because there is so much amazing information that's kind of buried within it. And it kind of reads like an alchemy text, because alchemy, you're supposed to read between the lines. Mm-hmm. So it's very much written in that way, but it's also very much written in that way that, there's so many people who you start talking about alchemy with them and they're like, oh, I don't like Harry Potter stuff. And you're like, oh, well, so it works it works on 2 different realms. So I guess it all depends. Everything comes down to the free will decision of the sovereign individual at the end of the day for true spiritual progress, so it all comes down to, our own personal selves of evaluating everything we see. Can we find that light side that might be in there, or are we going to kind of get sucked into that negative aspect of that dark side? And when I mean dark side too, when I kind of speak of that, like more of like, not so much like the yin aspect of the yin and the yang, but the darkness of like, greed, corrupt, fear is what I should say.
There's a difference of evil and dark. I think
right.
That's, or density, right, or dark, or whatever these words that we're putting on this energy that, I don't know, it's our masculine. Maybe it's our protective side. Like our darkness is our lone wolf that maybe would also run into a burning building and save someone we never met and then keep walking. I don't know. Our darkness is interesting, but it always gets confused with evil sometimes.
Exactly. And I kind of like, when I talk about it on the podcast, I think I meant we were talking about it as, you have your yin and your yang, like the womb of the light energy. And so when I speak about darkness in the like the Hollywood or that whole realm, it's more of that light energy, and you're turning your back to the light and you're creating a shadow. And that's really when we're talking about kind of like the energy that we're working with. It's not so much that yin feminine energy that's the mother of creation that's inside of you. It's more after that light has manifested and it's shining, you turning away from the light and creating your own little shadow almost. And that's kind of that aspect of, you know, that lower self, the individual that's like, you know, I don't really want to go on the whole journey, but I'm going to just kind of make my own little shadow world here and live in the shadow world. And that's where that lower ego comes in. And that's where you live in like a fear-based situation and you live by fear. And that's kind of what your, you know, if fear comes in, fear is what processes, and then fear is what you put out. Because we're very much like a input processing output system. So if that's what we're taking in and that's what we're kind of searching for and looking for, that's what we're going to be pushing out into our lives. So
like a prism.
So yeah, like a prism, exactly. It all kind of comes back to it.
Did you grow up in church or anything like that?
No, you know, I didn't actually. I'm a great individual for this, because I didn't have a spiritual experience until I was about 25 years old.
What was that?
So it was like the most amazing experience. So it was so interesting too, because I knew about everything when I was like in my early 20s. I started learning about, you know, kind of like the like really with the powers to be and everything that's like actually.
So you were
really
just kind of
happening.
an atheist-ish up
Yes,
until then?
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and you know, my family wasn't very religious. So I was just kind of like an atheist up until then, maybe an agnostic, but more of an atheist. And then
And the
I was
agnostic difference, if anyone's listening, it's just that you do think there's something else, you just don't quite know what. And then the atheist just believes you're worm food.
right, exactly, right. And you know, and it was probably more closer to an atheist. Like I was very much praying on the altar of modern science at that time. Science was my God. Science was my religion. So actually, now that I think about it, when you asked me that question, it wasn't like a traditional religion, but I was worshiping modern science, which I was kind of instructed through my public education is what the educated route would be to worship at the altar of modern science. So that's, I guess, what my God was until I was 25. And then I had this spiritual experience, and I was already very much well versed in so many aspects of like really what's kind of just like what real history was and really what's been kind of happening. So it was when I kind of had this breakthrough and kind of finally saw a world behind these five senses. It was like 6-7 years of just been kind of constant studying of alchemy, astrology, because before that I wasn't even touching subjects like astrotheology or even looking into religions. So that's kind of been what my crash course has been since then, and it's been a fascinating journey.
So in college you're learning. I have to say, I think there's like a lawnmower, so if you can hear it, I apologize. I'm going really close. But if so when you're in college and you start taking or you're taking in all these philosophies, is there the first philosophy that breaks your brain? Do you remember like what one it was that that totally splintered your school of thought?
You know, I think when because when I first approached my first philosophy class, was actually not even in America. So I went to school in America and at Arizona State. And then my sophomore year, I went abroad to Sydney, Australia. Or I went exchange, I should say. And I could only take history classes out there because I was a history major at that time. And I just took a philosophy class.
Like Australian history?
It was I was doing Australian history, which was really cool,
Oh,
and then
neat.
I did a European history class out there, which was fantastic. They were really, really great. And at that time, I was so focused in history because I was just getting out of college. I was just getting into college, and that's what I kind of thought like people who wanted to study had to do would be to study history, and I liked studying. So when you're coming out of public education, that's what you would do. You're like, oh, you like to study? You should just study history. You're like, oh, great. I get to study for like the rest of my life. And so I was really into history at the time. But my third class, I had to pick a third class, and it was a philosophy class. So the first philosophy that broke my mind was like intro philosophy 101. And I was like, I was going to throw up because like I never even thought about the science of living before. Like it wasn't even put on my plate as a kid. And for some reason, I was just eating what I saw on my plate from K to, from kindergarten to 12th grade. So as I went through that 12-step program of public education, philosophy really wasn't even brought up as like a subject. So to be like in this class and to be like, oh, there's a subject about the science of living, that cracked my case like right away. So just even like think about that. But I've always had a pull to like the classical philosophy. Once because all the philosophies was one of those things I could see myself swaying and being like, especially before I kind of understood like what objective truth was. Um, I could always see myself kind of like the last book I read was kind of the philosophy I would sway into in my early 20s. So I was very impressionable when it came to that because I didn't have my own principles at that time. So I swayed with the wind of thought that was coming in towards me. Um, but I remember when I found classical philosophy, that really grounded me because it was more of a focus on like objective truth, and the whole process of like the trivium and like as I think, so I feel, so I act, and kind of getting into kind of a process of that kind of organized thought to kind of build off of there. But and then I think with, of course, just being in the West, Eastern philosophy, even before I was religious, was always fascinating for its like simplicity. That always was just not so much for its simplicity, but its complexity.
What would be like a good example of like an Eastern philosophy?
So a good example of, I mean, like Confucianism is that would be like an Eastern philosophy. The Cha the I'm so funny, I can't even think of the other really good one from Lao Tzu right now. But there's kind of like two core philosophies there. And then obviously like Indian philosophy would kind of fall into that as well. Um, so even just like the whole idea of like Zen Buddhism, when I was on the outside, even before I was spiritual, Zen just was a very interesting approach of how it was, kind of like how it could say so much with so little. So I think that kind of pulled me into it. But I think philosophy as a whole, once I kind of approached the subject, that there was a subject of living well and living more completely. I think I was just kind of fascinated right from the intro, right from the beginning.
Right from the I remember there was like in college, it's so stupid, but there was like the Tao of Pooh, and it was like Winnie the Pooh
Yep.
book. And I feel
Yep.
like one of the things in it was Winnie the Pooh standing on a toilet, and it says like, man who stands on toilet is high on pot. I don't know. That was like one of the first philosophies in college that for some reason it made other philosophies make sense to me. It was like, oh, okay. Like my brain was taking in the philosophy and regurgitating what I needed to pass tests, but I was
Mm-hmm.
not conceptualizing. It was just not sinking in
Mm-hmm.
correctly. It was
Mm-hmm.
like science or math where it was like these numbers go here and this number goes here, but you really
Right.
can't do that with it. It
Right.
can't be that
Right.
way at all. And
Right.
that's one of the most beautiful things about it, is to take something that's been around for 1,000 years and then maybe to think, you added your own spin on it. Or I like just the tree falling in the forest and hearing like Birch Driver taking that and breaking it apart as a hermeticist. Or I like that idea, or listening to like My Maria 777 break that apart as assimilation theory. And I just like how you can take a simple thing like that and really describe every religion with it, every school of thought with it, and then in a way that can make it graspable for everyone to be like, oh, okay, I understand what you're saying. And I love just the idea of taking something so simple and then putting in such huge ideas into it. It's brilliant. I think that's what I like, the simplicity of the Eastern philosophy. It's like the less words.
Right. And you know, and one of the things I love too is like the Druids. The Druids, they had writing, but they would only use writing to record like business deals, or like kind of more trade. They wouldn't write down spiritual information. It was all from memory that was passed down. And it was actually like your job as you were an initiate to learn all of these almost these proverbs, and they would kind of organize information, kind of like in an almost like a haiku setup. It was kind of very similar. So they wouldn't write down spiritual information, like true information you had to remember, because to understand it, you had to instill it. But the one stuff which is so cool, the books that they actually did create to record spiritual information were actually, they would just take string, and then they had their own language with leaves. And they would actually put leaves on the strings. And if you understood the language, you could run your hand down the leaves and you would get the spiritual
message.
It would give you the message, because you would actually be able to, which is just amazing in itself. But I love that idea of, and that's why a lot of spiritual information, a lot of philosophy was called the oral tradition, because you know, it doesn't matter if you want to, like, you could go and just read philosophical books that are like thousands and thousands of pages and just kind of burn through these books. But if you're not getting anything from them, you're not pulling what you need to. If it's like a true book that you could be pulling some really good information from, because I think we almost like just kind of, we're so set just to kind of work through stuff as fast as we can, because we're kind of in that school method of, you know, almost how fast can I kind of complete this task. So yeah, you just really can't approach philosophy in that realm. It's so much has to be experienced. It has to be, you know, you have to kind of live through it, which is kind of the what's just so important.
What's the Druidic religion? Like, where's that from, or what's the
Druids? So the Druids were going to be the native individuals of the British Isles. So that's who Rome's going to kind of invade when Rome is expanding. They're going to go into the Druids. So the Druids are when you think of like Merlin, that's who the Druids kind of come from. So they're going to be living in that area, and they were highly spiritual individuals. That's kind of where like Stonehenge is from. They believe is like from a deep like Druid, or even maybe even deeper than them. And the Druids were kind of revitalizing that information, but a very sacred organization.
Do you think that they were alchemically advanced enough that they were doing magician type stuff of like wizard wars, like I'm an owl, you're a dragon, I'm a, Sword in the Stone cartoon type stuff?
I think that magic was such a big aspect of their lives, and they actually had a tier in their system of, you had like your not to be like you had your kind of your working class, or like the individuals, and then you had the art kind of individuals, and then you had a spiritual class that was like the top tier class, and they just did spiritual meditation. They were the ones that remembered the stories. They did all those. Within that class, I think there was some very, very powerful magic. You know, when Rome came to invade, there's this famous battle where all the Roman soldiers are lined up, and they're ready to actually invade and this higher class of priests come out of the woods just in white gowns with like their palms faced up, and they walked all the way through the battles, the troops that were ready to fight, and everybody put down their weapons, and those like Romans wouldn't fight. So they were actually having to get non-Romans to come into that area because the people were scared, because they felt that this was like such a spiritual situation to be interrupting. Like they're like, no, there's like, you could feel the magic of the energy. So, we lost so much information with the Druids, but I mean, the Druids are still around because like the Druids would make their magic wands out of the holly tree, and the holly tree is what they would make their magic wands out of. So that's what Hollywood is. That's their magic wand. So like, they're still around. The Druids still played a huge role. Like when Rome invaded, they didn't just take them out. They more incorporated that system, but more used it away from that light, and they more kind of moved it more towards that shadow, dark side, that selfish self that we've kind of seen kind of move since we've kind of moved away from that more spiritual connection that we had as more of like tribes and kind of like the deeper past aspect, when we were kind of more one with the land aspect. But yeah, the Druids are a fascinating whole spiritual study to even look into. Really, really great information that's still kind of available for them, but also very mysterious. And we really don't even know how big their influence is actually expanded, because a lot of people believe that the Druids were at that same time traveling all around the world, and they were making connections and kind of teaching this information. So they might have had even a bigger influence than we really understand, or probably will ever be able to understand. But yeah, a great little Sunday afternoon to kind of get into something if you want to go down a little rabbit hole. Looking into the Druids. Yeah, you would love it. You would love it.
Do you think modern science is just a way they're trying to figure out magic?
Yeah, so modern science, I think they figured out magic because modern science used to incorporate ESP. Modern science used to incorporate telekinesis. Modern science used to incorporate all these stuff that now is people kind of balk at. I mean, Duke University, all these major universities in the 1900s all the way to the 1960s were studying so many more subjects than that they kind of laugh at now. So modern science, I think they've discovered magic. Now I think modern science is following this just like this rabbit that's just kind of running all over the place, because I think what modern science is really doing now is trying to hide magic from individuals. So it's getting them so compartmentalized in their understanding and so calcified in their understanding. Modern science is just really trying to take the life out of everything so we don't see the magic in the world. Because I think they've found, I mean, these people have been using magic forever. So they understand magic very well. So I think through the kind of the evolution of consciousness that we're in as a whole, we're getting to a part where we should be much more advanced in kind of our magical understanding. And the individuals that know this are kind of using modern science to kind of just make us very zombie and dead-like in our critical thought process, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Not attached at all to anything. It's almost like if they can fill our false ego up with the idea that we know everything, then our soul never is allowed to question and figure it out. And so it's like they have us all on this very narrow path where they have us fighting over the color of our skin, our political party, our sexuality, or whatever. They have us fighting over all this real trivial baseline fleshy stuff that in our spirit means absolutely fucking nothing. And nothing. And so as long as they can keep us quote unquote like false philosophizing these polarities, maybe these these two dualities against each other, they can keep us doing that. And I really firmly believe, I know the Hermetic idea of like there's no duality without polarity, no polarity without duality, but my argument to that is the whole dichotomy is false. So every single argument you pick right now, the opposite has been chosen for you. They're choosing the opposite argument. We're not able to philosophize about it anymore. It's already been chosen. So we're under this idea now that, if I say Republican, the opposite of that is Democrat. When it could be, if I say Republican, you say the opposite of that is the ocean. Like we're in such, like, I just think we've been so broken with what we're allowed to question and what the opposite is already forced to us as. It's like put a line on, it's made, how they say time isn't linear. They've made every argument linear, and it's none of them, all of them have an infinite amount of answers to them. And, we're so broken, and I see it right in our philosophy.
Absolutely. No, you're 100% right. And there's the, one of the things that they love to do is that obfuscation. How can they make something a little bit more complicated, or, even changing what we understand as polarity, like you were just saying, because you're right, it's so limited, the polls that they even give us, because like Republicans and Democrats, you're pretty much the same party. You're exactly the same party. And that's exactly what they're doing, because it's all kind of in the language. And that's what I really like about alchemy too, is because alchemy really kind of looks into the language. And I think we might have spoke about this last time when we were chatting, but when we look at words in English, and when we kind of break down words in our formal education, we always look at the definition. And there's this great, I don't know if you ever listened to Mark Passio, but he breaks down words so well. And he was just speaking about how, in ancient times, if you understood a word just by the definition, you were a deaf Phoenician, because you actually need to, there's so many more parts. Like there's the phonics of it, right? So, and the phonics is what we got from the Phoenicians. You're a deaf Phoenician because you only understand like 1/3 of that word. So there's the phonetic breakdown, and then there's the etymology, like the history of the word. Where did that word come from? So how a word sounds is very important. So if there's a word that has a different definition, but it sounds the same or is the exact same word, there's actually a connection there. So, we were talking about the polarity. Well, the poles. So what they've done is they've taken the whole political spectrum, and which is so big, and they've narrowed us down to a far left side over here between Democrats are just a little bit farther left than Republicans. And what they do is they take the poles, and that's where they create the energy from. So what they're doing is they've put the poles together, where we go to put our election, which is our electrical vote, into the current, which is the currency of the votes that we do with our volt, right? Which is like the energy that we have. And so what they do is they take that pole and they get it come closer, so they can generate much more energy between those two poles, because now they're just bouncing our electoral energy right off of each other, rather than just energy kind of really evenly distributing itself in a true political spectrum. And what they do is they generate that energy, and then that's how they make huge events and huge waves happen in the future, because they create all this generated energy that we give into them, because we feed that energy right back into them. But it's just so interesting when you start looking at this whole system, and how powerful words are. And they just come down to vibrations. But it's not a coincidence that you have your poles on polarity, you have your battery poles on a battery terminal, and then you have your poles that you go to give your electoral vote at.
Your
it's
currency,
all about energy.
Your energy, your money is your currency.
Yep. And then who controls the currency? What controls the currency? The banks.
And that's why I'm so anti-cryptocurrency, because it's dead energy, and you're just putting it into dead energy. I'm super anti it. I'm all precious metals. I think gold and silver have been valuable because they're conductive of energy. It has nothing to do with anything else except that they actually conduct energy, and silver is the most conductive metal on the planet, and we are conductive. So if they are the most conductive metal and we're conductive energy, that's why it's so important that we keep these metals in our hands and not dead energy cryptocurrency.
Yes. Oh, and again, just with the push behind crypto, that kind of makes you kind of question it is like, why is it getting such a push from the system? Because the system very much is pushing the crypto story. Anytime the system's pushing something, you really want to be kind of cautious of it. But to kind of speak about the precious metals, you bring up such a great point, because I remember it was over 10, 12 years ago. And I remember I was at the time I was kind of like looking at like resource-based economies, and I was kind of curious about stuff. Um, and I was talking to an individual who was telling me about a philosophy, a kind of a economic kind of system that was set up where you would have gold, silver, copper, and I think there was one other one, and you kind of purchased into the currency that everybody accepted, all four currencies. But when you got your paycheck, like, you would put it into the currency that you were aligned with. So if like gold was doing
I want to
some
say nickel is the other one, but I could be
maybe, is that what
totally
it
wrong.
is?
I think it's
Okay,
gold,
yeah,
silver, copper, nickel, but I could be wrong.
I think you're right. And I think that's exactly, but it was just a fascinating idea, because you voted with your money and your energy. Because if like the silver industry that one was balanced through did some nefarious things, you would be like, oh, I'm not going to move energy through silver anymore. I'm going to go through gold for a little bit. So it held the individuals that balanced that whole system in line, because there was actually something being held accountable, and there was actually kind of competition in that realm, because they're going to want to make it as stable as possible, so you put more energy through that currency. But I think there's other ideas out there, and I love the idea of the precious metal, because again, just the whole crypto with the just the control that they have and the ability to turn stuff off is like, I love the idea of blockchain. I think
Mhm.
blockchain is amazing, to be able to keep something that can't be um, ever altered. But the crypto, I definitely am a little nervous about, with just the
Even
amount
with
of support.
blockchain, then whoever has the highest technology has the highest currency.
Right.
So then we're even under this like technological uh, stronghold where
Yeah.
it's borderless, no countries, no laws, no
Hmm.
anything. And really, like you're saying, if they turn off your electricity, then your crypto is gone. I have
Hmm.
so many friends that just have, they don't know their Bitcoin wallet or they don't
Hmm.
know their, and then what are these other currencies that they're coming out with every other day? It seems like the vampire you're inviting in your house. They will never rip your freedoms from you. Karmically, they're not allowed to. You have to give it all away willingly. They
Yes.
will walk you to slaughter. And that's what I feel like crypto is. And a
Hmm.
lot of smart people, it's their ego. They're like, no, I'll play this. I'll do it right. I'll just keep my money in here. They're not even realizing it's getting bigger because of the energy you give it. It's getting bigger and bigger. And now you have like, oh, I have this nest egg, this money. Now you have all this energy and the fear in your life. It's all fear based now. It's not from love that you're building up your cryptocurrency. It's very interesting the way it all ties in. And everyone's like, well, what's the difference of a dollar? What's the difference? You can hold a dollar in your hand. It's an agreed upon lie. Everything's an agreed upon lie. But I can hold the dollar in the hand and hand it to you. It's a physical trade of energy. That is
Hmm.
very important. A physical trade of energy. It used to mean no matter what you did, I didn't have enough to trade you for that. So I would give you this dollar. I might be able to trade you my goods too. I made jam and you're going to put a new roof on my shed. I can't give you enough jam for that. You don't need it. So I'm going to give you this dollar as the in between. And it had an energy of a physical change. The crypto is none of that. We're now making money off other people's downfalls. That's what
Hmm.
everything has come into. I make money not by you making money. I make money by your thing failing.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, it's the stock
Yeah.
market. It's the same.
Yep.
And there's no football. We're not doing any activities. Well, but why would we? We didn't grow up doing activities. We didn't grow up playing football. We didn't grow up playing baseball. We don't play soccer anymore. We grew up playing esports. And so how can we watch a sport we never took part in? How are we interested in that? So the only thing we know how to be interested in is video games. So now all that cryptocurrency is we stand around the water cooler and talk about my team's better than your team, but it's just my Doge versus your to the moon, whatever nonsense name.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about the tribal identification that happens with the cryptocurrencies right now. That's such a good point you just made there. I have so funny. That's a can opener you just did for me right there,
It's
because
like
that
the
just opens
Moderna
it.
Johnson and Johnson. Like we're gonna vaccine
Mhm.
argue. We're
Oh,
gonna,
that's so funny. That
y-
one is just the best. That one is just the best. Yeah.
and so
Mhm.
it's even funnier. It's almost like, gosh, the people arguing about Biden versus Trump are so deep compared to the vaccine arguers. It's like,
Right?
where are we now? People
Where
are
are we?
like, one weird one with the word etymology that I know, I've been waiting to talk to you about a little bit is I have a crazy obsession with Mary, Maria, Mar,
Mm.
Mer, C. And so I keep philosophizing that, because like the etymology of the word, if I take Mari, Mar means see, but Y in Latin is you. So it means you see. And Maria is Mar. It's the same thing. It's just the more Latin version of Mary. And then
Mhm.
we can attach to where Mary, they say that Artemis, sometimes the moon goddess, becomes Mary, which is also Diana. And then I also just found out this week, because I'm obsessed with witches lately, and I want to know like where these words come from. And the son of a bitch is because Diana was the huntress. She was the hunting goddess and she led the packs of dogs. And so if they called someone a son of a bitch, it means you were the son of a goddess. And so it used to be that like they wanted to start ruining all those terms to break any kind of goddess worship. And Diana, Mary, Maria, all these type things were like
Wow.
very powerful entities throughout time. And yeah, they just kind of it's just burying of things. But I didn't know. I saw that you did a Mary one. I haven't listened to that episode. I just saw the picture, and I didn't know if it
Oh,
was like
really?
the Virgin or what you were gonna go into on it.
Well, I love your breakdown right there, because that's actually something that we are looking at, because there's an amazing book that just came out, and they like three chapters were kind of just put into what you were just kind of saying, with like how Mary is broken down to the sea, and like how you were just saying it was fantastic. And it kind of just like goes into that. Um, and the whole feminine mystery system, and where everything really came from. And like, even when we go back to the cave drawings, it was always a goddess that they were painting, and the earliest understandings of kind of the spiritual understanding that we're developing today. Um, and so the that whole tie to that deep information that kind of comes from the feminine is just it goes so deep. So I love what you were saying about it, because it's the it's just this it's kind of this like endless subject. So as we're kind of entering into this new season that we just kind of started, Mary, and really the depthness of the female mysteries, because the female mysteries are kind of hidden everywhere, even
Everywhere.
in
It's even hard to
everywhere.
find secret society information about them. And I know
Right,
they existed. I know they
right.
existed, but I mean, you can find one like Scottish Mason woman. You can find like
Hmm.
a bunch of tales of pirates that were killed. You can find a bunch of witches that were hung.
Hmm.
But shit, the one article I even found, Secret Society of Women, from like a 1918 paper in New York, but it was being
Hmm.
written about like, hey, you guys, look at the Secret Society of Women.
Right,
I just think, look at how many of the secret societies we know of men. Are women that much better at keeping a secret? Or
right.
was like the rape and pillage of villages happening for thousands and thousands of years? You brought up something earlier, and I just always go back to, I don't know who said it, but they said, the truth is always spoken, a lie is always written. And
Mhm.
for women, I just have to think, when they were raped and pillaged and their village was taken over and all their men were slaughtered, and then the women and children were taken to the next tribe and taken over and had to learn a new religion, they would tell their bedtime stories to their children. And that would be the only way they could relay any of their history. And so it would all have to be buried in Wolves and Peter and Bible stories and, old tales. But it was really just the way a mother would take a big idea and a concept without scaring her child and tell that story so some bit of the truth stays in their lore. Because one day that child's going to be raised and think he came over on a boat from Africa and was just a slave to this land, but maybe his people were always born there. It's like that's how broken I think our history is that these huge cultures, these whole cultures are being lied to from where they came from. Especially and for me, African American culture in America, I just think at least half their history is a lie, if not the whole entire thing. But yeah, that was a whole lot to put on you in one.
No. I love it. I love it. No, I can't agree with you enough about how much we don't know about our history, and how much they use us to get mad about certain parts of our history when we have such rich history that we don't even focus on, even like in, the white culture, the academic white culture, when you look at like what was worshipped in history, it was always like warfare. It was never, we moved away from like the cultural advancements in architecture, the cultural advancements in music, and we moved away from like understanding that as being like huge aspects of history and why you always want to further develop it, to like even the history of like probably our fathers and the fathers kind of that were right before them, like this fascination with just learning about the last centuries or the earlier in the centuries wars and putting like all that energy into it, just shows how we don't even focus on this true aspect of our history that will open up like your own perennial philosophy, which is these deep stories of your culture, your mythology, that information that's shared in the vibration that came from your culture. And they try to keep that vibration hidden from you. And that's why they kind of destroy cultures, because you just from the culture you came from, you have your own unique expression of consciousness, that you can kind of put out. And they very not much have done a great job of silencing that in us internally, not to be able to truly express it. And if we do express anything, they make sure it kind of comes out in a way that it's like a tainted expression.
Sexist,
and
racist, blah. Yeah,
yes,
all the
yes,
ists put on it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And they use that energy, and they know it's such a powerful energy because it's just brewing inside of all of us. So what they do is, instead of us that coming out into a renaissance of art, culture, and connection, they wanted to make sure it comes out in an internal world, making itself external, like a warfare. That's exactly how can I put myself and isolate myself, and put up the walls, which they love to make us do.
And then if my cognitive dissonance can be, he is racist, he is crazy, he is sexist. Now everything you say, whoop, I put the filter on of just a block. My uncomfortable robot doesn't have to dig out of my comfort at all. It's just this, it's been done for me. The media already told me anyone who thinks like this is racist. So let me not go any further with anything that's being said in this conversation.
Right.
I actually feel like that's why I have this avatar this lifetime, because a lot of the questions I ask are not supposed to be asked by a lesbian. You're supposed to think this way as a lesbian. This is how you're fit. And I think maybe, because of the world we grow up in, where the white man or whatever, the wealthy white man, got these philosophies handed to them, easier for them to think like this. But maybe in a way they've also separated us from that, so we couldn't know it. They wanted us to think that guy's evil, that guy's against you, that guy's always going to have your worst instinct. So everything we think of when we even go like Amazon, Walmart, we're like rich white man. And so it's funny that a lot of my teachers in life have been those white men that I was told were evil. My best coaches in life, my best teacher, my best conspiracy friend, philosophy friend, all the guys that took the time to tell me this. And they had to be authentic and put away any of the fear of me being like, how dare you say that to me? How dare you? Like, you're a racist, you're a sexist, you hate gay people. But somewhere we have to put away that fear of also somebody calling us that for just saying, hey, do you think more Black people were actually native to America than came from Africa? Without being called a racist with that question. And it seems like just an easy thing to be able to say, but no, we don't live in, I mean, I live in a world now where I don't care. And I just want to, you know, be like, hey, you're a Christian. Do you think the Marys were the same? Do you think she was a virgin then a whore? Do you think they were lovers? Do you think Mary Magdalene was Jesus's lover? Do you think Jesus was in love with her and the only way he could deal with that torment on the cross was keeping eye contact with her the whole time, and she could not bear to look away even though it broke her fucking heart, but she was going to stay there with him until he died because she knew, and they were attached with energy? I like talking about this kind of weird shit with I just think the Bible alone, like, it's not just the racist, sexist. Because of people's faith, it gets them so scary to fucking just ask a question outside their faith. And those are the most important things. God, you can't think God's binary. You can't think he's just in that any one of the books. And you also have to believe if all these books are taken from us tomorrow, if we're just in an internment camp for the next 30 years, God will find us. We don't need it, like the ether is floating around us all the time. The energy is always there. If we listen, the answers will come to us. You and me could sit down long enough and write every religious book from an island if that was our calling to do that. I think we're in this kind of place where people fear the information leaving them instead of trusting they can just plug into it.
Exactly, because a lot of it's a remembering. You know, when you were saying truth hits, it's because when truth like kind of unfolds inside you, it's a blossoming experience, and it's not so much coming from the outside. It's this internal realization, or this, you know, this seeing something from a new perspective, or whatever it kind of becomes. But it's this internal process that kind of happens with that information. So I think it's just such a powerful thing in that realm. So there's just this internal knowing that kind of happens from it.
The other fun one, Adam and Eve, I romanticize that. Well, today actually I was like, what if there wasn't an Adam and Eve? What if it was just one person and they could manifest a being out of them? What if it was just a hermaphroditic person type idea? Because it does seem like in a lot of Indian cultures there was hermaphrodites, and somewhere in our culture in the like 70s and 80s they started making parents decide if they were going to be a boy or a girl, and then somewhere in the 90s they started just making the decision for the parents, like, and not even medically telling them this happened. And so I'm like, what if we're being separated, that same thing, to this male female and then to this slowly this trans type thing? But what about if we came from this master manifesting being that if I wanted a tiger, I thought about it long enough and meditated and opened my eyes and a tiger was there, or a waterfall or a mountain or whatever. It's just this philosophy of like the romantic idea of Adam and Eve sitting there and having this whole world to just like screw knowledge and an apple. I actually think that was the first fear. The second she picked that off the tree and had to bite it, it was, now I had to nourish myself. Nourishment wasn't going to just come to me. I had to chew it. And then that made me have to shit. And then that made me have to, it was this whole entire process. But we used to just sit around and manifest for each other. And like, I can't wait till Adam gets up and he sees the zebra and giraffe I made him. He's just going to be blown away. And then Adam stayed up all night. And the reason he slept in is because he's like, I can't wait till Eve gets to the beach and she sees these whales. She's going to lose her mind. She's going to lose her mind. And I just kind of love the idea of a world being created in love, like everything about it, every creature and sunset and wave just being like, I can't wait till they see this.
I love that. I love that. Oh, that's perfect. Well, you know, it's interesting that you brought up hermaphrodite, because in alchemy, you're doing this process of you're molding the two aspects of your consciousness, which is that male and female. So at one stage, there is a lot of hermaphrodite symbolism that comes up in like the fourth stage. And then as you kind of go through the process, you finalize it as the androgynous. That's kind of like the completion of it. So I thought that was very unique that you were speaking about Adam and Eve being a hermaphrodite, because it's very much that very much resonates with the alchemical process. And that idea of when you completely blend that, you do have that perfect ability for manifestation. Because if you think about it, how you put that tiger in front of you it's how your thoughts work. That's one of the really big aspects of thought. You can close your eyes and think of a tiger, and you don't have to go and like walk in your brain to get the tiger. That tiger is instantaneously right there. There's no time space barrier in that thought realm. And that's where manifestation is created. That's that feminine energy. So I think just even that process of going through there and understanding that's how thought happens, and then taking it down the line as thought, emotion, and action. That's like a great tool just to kind of recognize for the process to become maybe getting back to that Garden of Eden, because we are creators, like we kind of spoke about in the beginning. And I think getting that, how you brought up that hermaphrodite understanding of that love, imagination, connection of that Adam and Eve being the same thing. I think that's a great way to kind of look at that as pulling away probably a very deep principle that's buried in that story.
I think one of the things that everybody thinks they want to go within. At the same time, everybody's looking for their twin flame. Everybody's looking for this other person. They picture the Ouroboros, but they picture the never-ending story, two snakes linked into each other somehow. And I think it's a beautiful idea. I think having a perfect partner and a perfect spouse, and sometimes you get to travel with that person for a whole flesh, like 60 years. But I still don't believe that another person, and I could be, this is totally is naive, this is philosophizing. I don't believe it's possible for another person to complete you. I think they have a piece of your puzzle, sometimes a huge piece of your puzzle. The idea that they have the last piece of your puzzle is ridiculous to me. And I think so many people out there, almost like it's easier to look for that flesh person out there than to figure out that other half of whatever is going on in here, maybe. But I don't know if I believe in twin flames. What do you think? What do you think?
I with twin flames, where I'm kind of at with twin flames now, and I would love information if anybody can produce it. I just haven't been able to find it. When it comes to spiritual understanding, we're in a very much a spiritual kind of naiveness at this time in history. We're not as advanced as we were spiritually in the past. So for twin flames, for me, my problem is I can't find where twin flames was written about in Egypt. I can't find twin flame, I can't find the source material of it. Where I can find stuff about soulmates written from very far back away. And they talk about soulmates in a very much a similar way that you just spoke about. You would never be able to attract your other soulmate until you completed yourself fully. And it was only until you completed yourself 100% that you could actually vibrate to make that attraction of your true soulmate to come into your life. So ancient philosophy agreed with kind of your understanding there on the idea of attracting a soulmate. And I've seen stuff, old text of spiritual information written on soulmates, but I haven't seen anything on twin flames. But I'm not saying it doesn't exist. Yeah. It's such an endless thing, and I would love it. I was actually going to make that announcement on my own podcast, but we'll share it through yours too, if somebody can kind of come across that information, because like I just don't remember hearing this word as popular until the last couple of years. And everything in the new age movement, I love, there's some stuff in the new age movement that's just so amazing, but there's a lot of produced garbage by sinister organizations in the new age to kind of divert us off of the path. So anytime there's spiritual information, you always want to go as deep back as you can. Like, was this in Egypt? Was this in India? Was this in China? That's where you kind of want to get started from, and all the other places as well. With like Aztec, Native Americans, Aboriginal in Australia, of course. So all these native cultures, is this information anywhere else? Where does this kind of come from? So that's my kind of case on twin flame at this point, is I haven't seen anything deep on that. But I do completely agree with you on the soulmate thing. It's all about the completion of yourself. And once you go through that process, I think you start vibrating at a resonance that can actually attract that perfect other part of you. Because that's when you they talk about like, the fall from matter, you almost are this completeness with the oneness, and then you kind of go through your own fall, like Adam and Eve. And it's pretty much like you have to get separated, and that duality aspect has to happen for you to incarcerate into matter. So they really say that soulmate is that separation that happens at that aspect, which is a lovely story. Like, I don't know if that's exactly how it happens, but it's a great little story. But either way, this I think always the focus, whether it's twin flame, whether it's soulmate, it always has to come from yourself, and it always has to come from your own personal development and your own character development, that you'll be able to attract that right person when the time is right. So that's kind of my take on it.
I am gonna pause on that note
Okay.
real fast because my dogs are all barking, and so I'm
You
gonna
got
let
it.
them out and do that thing, and
You got
then
it.
we'll do another hour if you're cool with it.
That sounds perfect. That
Okay,
sounds perfect.
Be back
I'll
in
see you.
like 3 or 5.
Okay, you got it.
The recording has stopped.
So guys, of course, my dogs totally broke my train of thought in this, and my 2 little rats, and had to go out, but it was probably for the best. It changes the conversation, and it also gives me a chance to self-promote right here and let you know to go to projectchaney.com. You can find everything. I know I keep telling you guys this, I'm working on links. I want to add everything so you can find all my awesome guests. You can find appearances that I've done. You would be able to find a link maybe that I was on Zero with Sam Tripoli this week, which is his spiritual podcast. And I don't know if I'm the person that should be going on and talking about spirituality. And I don't know if I was supposed to be doing it this week, where I was like, I don't know how love or light I am. I'm a piece of shit. So yeah, that happened. And you can find that on Rockfin with a lot of other amazing guests that have been on Project Cheney. They're also on Rockfin. So it's a pretty cool network of tons of information and spirituality and cool stuff. And yeah, that episode is up there. You can find me on Cheney in Wonderland on Instagram, Cheney_in_Wonderland. And you can also find Project Cheney on Instagram. And I have all the shows I've done with the guests I've done and the links you can find them and reach out and all the cool stuff they're talking about. And yeah, so back to Daniel. I know I did all the stuff and let my dogs out and everything, and then my wife just pulled in and then she started to let the dogs out. I was like, no, I just did it. They're fine, I just did it. Thank you. She was like trying to be helpful and quiet, and I'm like, I'm on my break right now, it's fine.
It's perfect.
I know. It is nice just having the option in there, and sometimes I don't even need it, but sometimes it's like something in my life will go haywire, and I'm so glad it's just the options there where I'm not live. I don't have to worry about a chat room.
Right. No, that's perfect.
It was kind of something about this whole thing. I realized I was casting in the word breakdown. I was casting. I was podcasting. And the more I realized and took my own witchy responsibility and my own magic, and the more I fell into that, the more responsibility and where it was taking on me to just go out there and, like, I don't know, there was too many energies in the room with the people that were on the actual screen. There was too many energies in the chat. It wasn't even about what they were saying. Like I could start to feel like it was like we were all in a room together, and then whatever God was supposed to be between me, like I could feel connections I was making in a room on a podcast, like on a bigger forum. And I was feeling the spirit in me that was like, ask this, keep going there with this, talk about this. But then it was like all these other battles of the other stuff in the room that I wasn't taking enough responsibility for. So once I realized that, oh, I'm casting, I have to take a huge responsibility in it. And I want it to be a really slow alchemical process of a conversation where I like kind of get high on a person and then have the conversation sit on me enough days that I think about it the same way I would like a DMT trip. So that when I do the intro of it, it's like all formed like a whole experience for me. And, you know, because we are projections, I call it Project Cheney, but Project Cheney, because it's like we're all doing this.
That.
Like, and I felt like I was going to do so many different shows. I had so many friends like kind of help me out, and even like big people in podcasting, like, hey, you should do this idea, or what about this idea? And I'm like, conspiracy is fun. I'm into it. I want to talk to those kind of weird people, but wherever it is I'm headed or the questioning, I just don't want it to be I don't want there to be a dictation of like, you're coming here to teach me about this. And then that's what we stay on, or you feel the need to have to keep getting back to your subject so that your audience that's coming here can get, but I'm like, what if, and then even, what do I have to prepare for? Nothing. I just want you to come with your heart and your head, and whatever happens is meant to happen. And I kind of love that idea of what hopefully this turns into, different than anything I've done before.
I love it. No, I think that's the course I see with like, you know, just the conversation we've had and just kind of meeting you that first time. I like the idea of you kind of steering the ship of conversations with a bunch of unique people, because I do think you have that curiosity that we were just talking about, and that ability to ask really great questions. And that's just I think that's going to be part of, apart from the amazing information that you bring up with all the topics that you kind of discuss, that ability to ask really good, unique questions that get even the person who answers questions about this stuff maybe all the time, because I'm sure you're going to get like experts in the field. You have a unique way of asking like unique questions that I think that even gets an expert in the field, when you have one of those people on here excited about answering those questions, because they're like, I haven't even thought of it in that angle before.
Oh,
so
that's
I
really
think
nice.
this is
Awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I think this is a perfect format for you.
Oh, thanks. Okay. Well, the next question that I was going to ask you is, we've talked about magic a little bit, and is alchemy magic?
Yeah, absolutely. So magic, magic can really, my favorite definition I've ever heard of magic was change in accordance to the will. So, and that will being, if it's will with a capital W, it's the will of like your highest self, the highest order of the universe. And that's change in accordance with the will. So, and then the lowercase w would kind of be that lower ego, that selfish self. So all magic is making something change in accordance to your will. So you can do physical magic where you actually will, build a fence, and you've made change in accordance to your will. You've used your will to build that fence. But you can also use it in the mental application and in the spiritual application through, manifesting, meditation, rituals. All this aspect can kind of bring stuff into the physical experience. So alchemy, being a process of transmutation, is like directed magic. So it's directed magic to personal development and character growth. So you're taking that will, you're taking that creative power you have as a creator, and you're focusing that energy that we've been speaking on the you very, not fast, but just very focused development of the self. So you go into alchemy, into the caterpillar, into the cocoon, with the idea coming out a butterfly. So that's where your focus goes, and that's where your will's kind of focused on. So magic is the output of it. So yeah, it's like directed magic into development of your conduct and your character.
Does a true alchemist ever feel like a butterfly?
So what true alchemist will feel like a butterfly, but the alchemist always knows he's a butterfly now in this new octave. But the alchemist knows there's an infinite amount of octaves, so he's always going to be climbing that ladder. So that eighth note of the musical note gets you to the next octave, and then you start the cycle again. So the alchemist is always process of going back into that cocoon to get a higher perspective, to get more beautiful experience, more colors in its wings, and to able to kind of fly for a higher perspective. So always kind of going up in the octaves. You're never done, because the plans are infinite. So you always just get a finer part of the plan, and they just always kind of go on top of each other. So the process is kind of a continuum one for the alchemist. But there is experiences where you go through these steps of alchemy, and you're very gratitude for those experiences of feeling like you are a butterfly. And the alchemist knows when he has this furia of euphoria, this feeling of like internal love, to be grateful for it and to really cherish that moment, not to deny it, because they know with the good will come bad, and that they want to like really cherish this experience of, oh, I'm almost as one as I've ever been with creation. So to really feel into those experiences when we do come across those.
Do you believe in like a sigil magic where people can put magic in a symbol and put that symbol out?
So what you're kind of doing with magic is you're really taking the male phallus, the left side of your brain, and you're really taking that sword and you're impregnating the feminine side. So you're really taking a thought process and you're going to impregnate the ether, the subconscious, with this information. And what you're doing is you're kind of planting the seed that the subconscious is now going to kind of grow through. So the subconscious speaks in symbols. It doesn't speak in words. So sigil magic is very powerful for the aspect of this symbol that you have created is an internal code for your subconscious mind. So what that does is, most of the time with sigil magic, you're going to meditate on that sigil for a very long time. And then what you want to do is you almost plant the seed. And then a lot of sigil magic, you end up taking that sigil and putting it to a place that you're not going to maybe see for like a week or two, maybe in a book somewhere that you're going to kind of come across it again. And then the idea is when you kind of come back across that sigil magic and you see that symbol, it's going to re-impregnate that into your subconscious mind. And then it just kind of keeps building that aspect. So I definitely believe in ritual magic, because it's the same exact thing as the sigil magic. You're putting a symbol into your mind, into your subconscious, because that's how your subconscious speaks and that's how your subconscious operates. So your subconscious not only stores all your information, but it also attracts information into your life and experiences into your life. So you really kind of help direct it on what kind of vibrations you're trying to attract into your life. So I would say sigils could be powerful.
I've just kind of learned about them in the past few weeks, and in all the symbology study that I've ever done, it was like, it dawned on me that like I could create a sigil 2,000 years ago with whatever my intention of the sigil was, that now could be a symbol throughout so many religions in the world that they maybe worship or use it maybe in something for good or bad or whatever, but it was my sigil. I made it. I had the intentions. I meditated on it. I lit it up. It's my activated sigil. Does intention of a whole, can that take over a sigil? And like my example would be like the swastika.
Yes.
And I know some people are listening to that and they immediately thought World War II, Germany. And then a lot of other people, they immediately thought like India and Buddhism with it. And so it's like, there's just so many, or is it a struggle back and forth where we can actually see the dualities pull apart how powerful this symbol is? I don't know.
Yeah, the swastika one, that is a fascinating one for the aspect of because they've kind of replayed it in history, we really do see this one as like we've gotten really separated from that symbol. Um, but that symbol is so old. And even though the Nazis represented everything that is evil in this world and everything that they did, that was this short amount of time for the aspect of how long the swastika has been around for and how powerful it was in every culture. Because every culture had the swastika. So that's a very fascinating one. And I think over time, if consciousness keeps evolving, I think that the swastika will come back around. I think just how we perceive time, we feel like it's been a long time tainted, but really in the chain of history, it's not even
It's
a,
a
a
blip.
flat,
Yeah.
exactly. So we look at it because we're like 3 generations removed, and we're like, hey, like we know that these guys were just the turds of all turds. But this symbol is very powerful, but it still has that negative connotation. So I think in future generations that will dissolve just because there's such a powerful presence that comes with that. But that's why they chose that's why they chose that symbol, because they knew it was so powerful. But I do think the internal intentions on a symbol, especially if it's like your own created one, and if even like look like if you put the intentions into something, I think there's a lot of power that can kind of come with that. So even like somebody who uses a cross for a different way than what the cross is used in Christianity, there's that internal relationship that happens right there, that's very powerful. And even though the historical, thought vibration, emotional vibration behind that symbol is powerful, there's that independent relationship is very powerful too. So I do think that there's ways to kind of adapt symbols to yourself as well.
What about is it servitor magic? Where is it conservator magic? Servitor, where you actually create a being to protect you for a certain amount of time?
Yeah, and servitor magic. So that's when you're kind of getting into that's kind of like a little bit different of a realm of magic, because that's where it can get a little dangerous, kind of in the aspect of like there's some people who really are successful with that. But
Will you explain what it is? That is a big thing I just brought up, like a whole concept on this show that I never really talked about before. And I think you probably will do a better job.
Yeah. Well, like kind of how you expressed it in servitor, there's kind of two different schools of thought of like what you do. There's the idea that you kind of create this being, and that you kind of create this like energy, or it could even be like where some people say it's almost you could create this like almost internal personality inside yourself that can kind of is really focused on manifesting, because it separates in your own consciousness a little bit. So that's why people can kind of sometimes advise against it. But yeah,
like
it's
an altar almost.
Yes, exactly. Inside yourself, that just can streamline magic because it doesn't think about your thoughts. It's not in your world. You kind of isolate it. So there's that aspect of it that can be very dangerous for the individual. The idea of creating the energy, like an actual like outside entity. But then servitor magic also, if I believe correctly, is also like the idea of like connecting with like interdimensional beings as well. And that could be low level interdimensional beings, and that could be high level interdimensional beings. So individuals that are very mediumistic, and they have that transparency that they can kind of do that. I do believe some of these individuals can contact very high order of like kind of like spiritual entities. So I think it goes on two different realms. You can reach very high levels, but you can also find the darkest of the dark there. And most people, because it's such an education that goes into it, and you really need to be like, I mean, that would be like a medicine man or woman probably teaching you how to do this so you could actually get to these higher level individuals. Because if you're just reaching in the dark, angels usually don't grab you when you're reaching in the dark. That's usually going to be this level. And that's like, I mean, that's what you're tapping into, like a Ouija board and stuff. That's all kind of servitor magic. You kind of, the entity is this box, and that's what you're kind of operating through. Because even when you kind of generate that energy, They're really just giving a vessel for an energy to kind of live through. And that's kind of why it is. So that's why through occultism, that was kind of always looked away from. So occultism is kind of more like the science of metaphysics. And occultism always, that was kind of like a radical side that would practice with servitor magic. A lot more in like the Middle Ages, there was kind of stuff doing
Here's
that
a
kind of stuff.
weird, is Jesus Christ an example of servitor magic?
Is Jesus Christ an example of servitor magic? I would say I wouldn't say he would be an example of servitor magic, but I would kind of be interested to see where that the root of that that question comes
Like,
from.
it
You
just makes me think, like, if somebody creates this entity at the beginning, the same way that if I wanted to sit here now and kind of create this thing that's going to be here for a certain amount of time that opens up a certain level or tool in myself to use or utilize, and I create the way it looks, it has a feel, a vibe, a way it dresses, what it would do. It's a character, it's a real thing in my brain. Could it become so real, like law of observation wise? If I can get you to see it too, now it's more powerful than it was. And if I can get a church of people to see it too, and now it's more powerful than it was. And so throughout time, do these things like Buddha, Ganesh, Thor, Thoth, what, does it somehow give it some kind of conservator type energy that now it's a magic, it's a real thing, it's an existence, and it protects you in the same way, or it doesn't. Like you're saying, there's low level ones and high level ones. Like people can call on Christ's energy to protect them or be with them. Isn't that kind of the same idea?
Yeah, no, I think, and definitely, I think that's a great kind of way to kind of look at it through that aspect. And especially if they're calling on like an external, if they kind of see creation as like this external process and an external kind of God like that. So I could definitely kind of see that relation to it. And again, I think it kind of comes out to, what levels are you expressing that information through? Like the greatest analogy is like what you do with a hammer, right? The hammer's not good or evil. It's what you do with that hammer that makes it good or evil. Like you could hang beautiful art with that hammer, and display like a beautiful piece of art, or you can like use it to cause damage on somebody or something. So it all kind of comes into that free will use of the individual. But I think that actually that idea of the servitor, especially like not so much of the idea of like idol worship would kind of fall into what you were kind of saying there, and that that calling upon of that external kind of energy. So I could definitely kind of see where that relationship could come from, and especially the idea of them utilizing that energy, like the church utilizing that energy to create that energy for control, for energy, grabbing of individuals and stuff. So I could see that being used on multiple different kind of realms in that way, in that thought process.
I think one of my big things of recent is I just think people are doing rituals every day in their life. They're, making cakes to moon goddesses and blowing out candles and having wishes go up places and having, trees in their house with ornaments hung on them, and they're digging up eggs that represent twin goddesses and gods. It's just crazy to me the amount of rituals people are doing every day. But if you say witch or magic, it gets in their crawl. Like even the idea of it just sounds so, even though they think it sounds so crazy and it's so ludicrous to even talk about, it triggers them in a way, like it triggers their truth in a way, that it makes like a reek come out in them. Like they can't stand it. And I also think a lot of these biblical books talk about, like witchcraft or something being bad, but then they're practicing magic throughout the entire, entirety.
Like, yeah. Like what would Jesus be other than the magician on the magi on the tarot card? like that's a great representation of Jesus, that first, like that card after the fool, which is like the magician. um yeah, so I think the idea, again, we have this analytical postmodern interpretation of the Bible. And that's kind of interesting because this is what we're kind of working on this season, which is kind of exciting, but really separating from this analytical, literal interpretation that we kind of been trained to do in this era that we live in, and expanding it much deeper than that. So this, we read the Bible so literally. We read all mythology so literally. I mean, even fairy tales and fables, how we read them today is so disconnected to the true understanding of like what these stories are really trying to tell us. So I think with the Bible and with the idea of magic is we get this dualistic, polarized understanding, and we read everything so literal that we come across something like that and we just tag it as good or bad, or we've not really read the verses ourselves and it was pushed on from a pastor or a priest that magic is evil. But then you really start going through the Bible and you're coming through it and you're just seeing all these examples of magic and you're like, I'm not really seeing where it's kind of say that like this is bad. Like I see when it was used negatively, but I don't just see it as like this thing is bad. So yeah, I think that's one of our biggest mysteries, and one of the biggest things that we're kind of disconnected from is the true understanding of these sacred texts, and that they're really just, our own autobiographies. And if we actually just paid attention to it, we would realize that all these stories are about our own internal selves. I think there'd be some drastic kind of changes happening in the internal world, and then obviously from our internal to the external.
Do you get into crystals? Are you a person that has stones, or?
I definitely have some crystals. A lot of them have been like gifts that have kind of come to me, but I understand the energy behind them. Like in my community, there's some individuals that are like super into crystals. We live very close to, I'm like an hour away from Sedona, and Sedona is just like Sedona, Arizona. That's a big community that's very much into the vibrations and the crystal frequencies.
I've had friends that have gone to healing retreats in Sedona specifically.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a beautiful place, like nature ways. I mean, even the people up there, everybody's really fantastic. I was just actually up in a town near there recently, and they would love you up there. Yeah, you would do really well up there.
I want to go everywhere. I can't wait until the world collectively wakes up, and because I just know it's going to happen. And they're like, what have we been doing for the last year?
What did we do?
Because I don't mind taking a drive either, but I'm not putting a mask on I'm not putting a mask on ever. So the sacrifices I have to make for whatever that's meant up till now is what it is. And now I've even like, okay, maybe that friend, if I was going to go to Australia, I would put a mask. But no, I'm not gonna. It just is what it is. So I can't wait till the world collectively has their big,
my gosh, aha moment.
And here it's amazing in Florida. I mean,
you guys did great. Yeah, very proud of Florida.
Yeah, and there's still more unmasked than masked. I can go to a tiki bar right now and see live music, and if I saw a masked person in the crowd, it would be bizarre. And it makes me so sad. Like at first I was grateful, yay. A little naive what everyone else is dealing with out there, but it just makes me so sad. Like how important facial like smiles and frowns or cries or just this whole part of your face just gone, and then you just sound like this when you talk, and then no one can understand you, so why even bother talking? It's just vibrationally we're so disconnected in what's happened in a year. I mean, I think we're so amazing that humans have become the most vulnerable they've ever become, the most authentic they've ever become, and they've made the closest relationships they've ever made with people online. Because no matter what evil shit they try to put out, we transmute everything because we're just so powerful. But yeah, I can't wait to just hop on an airplane again and go to Sedona like a normal American.
Right. My freedom to travel. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Travel papers. And it's just crazy how I can't believe we got to this point. I cannot believe we got here. I would have never, I just thought they'll never let it happen. And that's the slow
Yeah,
and boil.
that was a little bit of discouraging. I feel like that was it happened so quick, not even so quickly, but you could just see how it was kind of developing. And it yeah, it's exactly what we were warned against. And it was all this stuff that we would have read in all those books when we were growing up, and we would say, oh, that would never happen. And then you kind of watched it develop right in front of your eyes. And then you're like, oh, I 100% see how that happened. Yeah, so it's a very, very interesting, we definitely find ourselves in biblical times, Cheney.
Yeah,
So,
I know. Do they convince us of it because we're such powerful manifestors that they have to
Mhm.
get the TV to tell us, so we create it?
Mhm.
And that's why all these black mirrors are all in front of us everywhere.
Yes, the Black Mirrors, absolutely. I love there was the interview with the individual in the Amish community, and they were like, why do you think the Amish hasn't had any cases of COVID? And he was just like, because we don't have a TV. Like, he was just like, wait, like, why? Well, we wouldn't have it because we wouldn't even, we would just be like, oh, it's just the flu, and he's just like, oh, because we don't have a TV. And it was just like people, like, just that response alone should have just been woken up so many people to be like, oh, if we didn't have a TV and we weren't told that this is a thing, it would have felt like every other year with some people getting the flu.
Somewhere the dangers of Donald Trump were that everybody, everything became politicized. Everything became politicized. So once it became political, our egos were so intertwined in it that no one could see clearly anymore. It just became an ego battle, like where it was like, my dad said he doesn't wear a mask either. I'm not going to vote how my dad votes. It like became some weird where every decision that was made was down to the core of what they conditioned us to think. So it was like, I think the most surprising thing for me was how many of my organic, hippie dippy friends became pro-vaccine. That was like,
oh, amazing.
So surprising to me. I was like, I would have expected all my like conservative church going friends to go get the vaccine way, way, way before my like gardening crystal hippie friends. I was like, but you guys are the ones that are anti-vax, all of the vax. How are you pro this vax? It became like people's own philosophies were breaking. And because of this, where they're like, I love Joe Biden now. I love Joe Biden. And you're like, you hate Joe Biden. And like, it just as a whole, it really made everybody cement their shoes of their ideas. And then it didn't even matter if you didn't ever even think about that idea before, because it was put there for you, and now you had to agree with that whole thing. Like, oh, you love cops, you're anti-abortion, you're pro-Christian, you're pro-Trump, this is your side. And then and you're racist, and you hate trans bathrooms. That's your side. On the other side, we have this list of things. And it was just like, sign up for your list, kids. And that's what you have to stick with. Bernie Mittens and Tiger Kings. I know. I just don't think anything's organic. I'm at the place that I think every single thing that goes viral, even on the internet, is like they're mocking us by saying viral.
Oh, I didn't even think about that wordage right there. Yes. Yep.
So we think we're so clever when we Bernie Mittens and keep posting it for each other, but really it's something for them. I don't get everything, but because our bodies don't know what we're saying when we say Bernie Mittens, but the way I'll dissect everything, that if I took burn, it's probably like burn me. It's probably like something like I hear Jesus now, and all I hear is he's us. He's us. He's us. Like the J would be a H. Like if they broke it up, and I know everyone Yeshua and Yahweh and all these other things, but I'm like, he's us. He's us. He's us. That's all it is saying over and over again.
Yes.
Yeah. So everything, even on the Tiger King, Tiger King, Tiger King, Tiger King. I'm like, do you guys realize what Tiger King is? Like, do you guys know the lore of where the tigers come from and why it's important that they bring it up and regurgitate it for us every year? Like, there's more of a reason that there's certain things I think we pull from the aether and they have to cover it up before we all collectively get it.
Yes.
So it's like that Tiger King idea, like we're pulling it for a reason. It's part of our history for a reason, but they have to bury it with this nonsense. So when you're like, why do I keep coming up with tiger in my head? Why do I want what is that? What am I pulling up? You're buried. You don't no longer look in the ether. You look on Netflix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh no, you are 100% there, and that's why they study astrotheology so much, which is the evolution of consciousness since, that's like the precession of the equinoxes and the eras and the ages. And this is why we don't study them in schools, but they're masters at understanding these true calendars, because one of the big things is when we talk about questions, you get into that question of like, what is time, when you really get into spirituality. And as you kind of really start sitting with that question and kind of getting some internal realization on it, you really get to the next question. And that is, where are we in time? Where is evolution of consciousness in time? And then that really opens up a deep question. But this is something that they study very religiously, because if you study the evolution of consciousness, you will understand what consciousness is happening, what stage of consciousness evolution we are in. And that's how they're able to understand what's coming in that perennial philosophy and kind of hijack that information. And that's how I really say it, because these individuals, because they kind of sacrifice that creative aspect of themselves, they're good organizers, they're good manipulators, but they're not really good creators. So what they're really good at is hijacking. So they can't make their own plane, so they just kind of let you make the plane, and then they hijack the plane. Like, they don't start Whole Foods. They wait right before Whole Foods might be this wholesome company for like a year or two, when it was like its own little thing. And then they let you build that thing, you create that community, the image, and then they hijack it, and then they make it into what it's going to become. And that's kind of how they work. And that's why they just kind of wait for these creative innovators to make the money. They come in and either
the Game of Thrones.
Exactly.
It's like he's attached to the aether. He's pulling dragons because dragons are in all of our history. He's pulling these names. He's pulling these like real big attachments to the earth. He's pulling this wall. He's pulling these White Walkers. He's pulling the importance of like eating like something with the young blood. He has all this stuff going on all throughout that thing, and they hijack it. They change the ending. They put a feel into it that anyone that read the books is like, this doesn't feel this. They can't put their finger on it. They're like, that scene didn't happen. That person's not there. But there's a feel that's gone that the people that read the books can't explain about the show. But it was hijacked because somewhere there was too much truth there. He like hit on too many things from that creative space you're saying those lizards can't create. So it's like when you're really in tuned and you're in flow state where you're just going, where you're not even creating this, you're just pulling it. It's there because it's real. Like the second that starts to happen, they know it's happening, and it scares the shit out of the bad when it's happening. And so they have to hijack those things. And I know that seems like the craziest one to go full like the Game of Thrones, but there's so much about our history that's just shoved in that show that I'm like, somewhere there's a lot more truth in this than fantasy.
And God, you killed it. You just nailed it too when you were talking about how they messed with the ending of that, because people were starting to feel that there's something deeper than just fantasy here. There's even there's something deeper than the gore. There's something deeper than the sex. Like, there's something deeper here. And they like had to just like, they love to like, just be like, there's not like, even like the ending that we got was just like, what is this? This is like this fractured thing that was just presented. And they almost did that just so you didn't pull anything away from it. So where you left that series, like, did I waste my time on that? Because it was just like it built up to like nothing, and it just kind of like fell through. And it's almost like that buildup of like following that truth path. They're like, oh, you felt like there was maybe something real that was going to happen, and then there's going to be nothing. And it almost like gets you in that mindset of, if you have that feeling again of like that curiosity, you're going to like pushing it into your mind of like, oh, I've been let down by that curiosity before, and they're just going to like kind of move on and stay on their hamster wheel and not really kind of follow that desire and that inspiration that we've been kind of talking about. So yeah, I think the Game of Thrones example is a fantastic example to use in that allegory that they've been kind of utilizing for us.
Another weird one that I've actually hated when it first came out, but because of philosophy, I love the ending now, is The Sopranos. I
Right.
love the ending of that now. I love the blanket closed, like the way my head has broken down the ending of that show since that is only because of philosophy that I enjoy it so much. I don't want to give anything away, but did you watch The Sopranos?
Yes. Yeah, my mother is an Italian from the Bronx.
Oh,
So
perfect.
yeah, so she was like, we would watch it and she'd be like, that one reminds me of my cousin. That one reminds me of my cousin. So she just like loved it, like that
And
aspect.
people are like, those are such characters. I'm like, no, that's real Italian men. Like real
that's
Italian men are that kind of character. I've worked under those guys. I've waited on those guys. I know those guys.
Yes, it is. It is an archetype for sure. Being Italian myself, I've seen it, and it is so funny. And they did such a great job capturing that in that show and capturing that energy. That cultural expression of that energy. But yeah, the ending of that is when I first saw that. I think I was just like a freshman or sophomore in college. I was just like, oh, I didn't like that. As I've gotten older, wow, that one is just, as every year you almost appreciate that ending even more and more, because you're just like, that was brilliant. And it was before its time that director knew he was going to take a hit initially on that and people were going to be negative, but he's just like, if you can just wait, it's going to pay off, because it totally did. You're right, that's something you think about all the time, of how perfectly they ended that.
And now, I really was just kidding. Spoiler alert, because it's like this show's so old. I love. This is the craziest. I love the idea of just how intense that scene was. Like just from the time he gets out of the car to walks in to sits with his family, the music playing and everything, and that intensity for me, just watching it as an audience, it was finally I got the idea of what Tony lived like his entire life. Like the intensity of that. Is he going to die? Is he going to die? Is my family going to die? Am I going to get shot now? Locking my car. Is my car going to blow up? And opening the door. Is somebody at the diner going to shoot me? Is my wife going to shoot me right now? Is somebody going to shoot all of us? Is it like that idea of that churn of what that whole last scene did, with all of us knowing it was the end and every question we had to ask? That is how Tony lived his whole life. And that's how you live in that lifestyle.
Oh my God, that's amazing. That's perfect, because you're right. Because the whole time we were watching Tony, and that was the first time we got to really experience like what it's like to be Tony. The whole time he was like this figure that we were just watching that character develop. But that was the first time we actually felt how he internally felt. And so how it ends, it's almost like a release. It's almost like an anxiety. It's like, oh, thank God that's over, because that had to be terrible to live, how stressful that was to be in that lifestyle. So yeah, that's perfect. It's a perfect representation.
What a weird. I know. I didn't know we were going to talk about The Sopranos.
Right? I love it.
I'm like, oh, somebody's seen The Sopranos. I always want to start that show again. But every time I go to, it's like the magic for me is missing. Mm-hmm. It's so weird. It's like, but it was one of the best shows. I think even the philosophy of his family versus family, like his mob family. It was like these two different parallels going on. And I guess maybe I would be interested now, even thinking this way, of what was going on inside his household with what was going on inside of his network of dudes. And if it
Right.
went alongside each other, where he's scolding this guy at the same time he has to come home and scold his daughter, and then this dude gets killed, but his son, just got suspended from school. Like, I wonder how much of that stuff was going, because he had to come and play these two facets
That's
of dude.
right. That, yeah, I think even as an adult, now they think about it, because I was like in high school when that movie was like really, really popular. As more of an adult now, I'd be fascinated to go back and look at that, because I would probably be watching completely different things, because I would love to see the parallels in that and how that probably did line up very well, of how he was kind of playing father in two different realms, and he's always kind of living between those two lives. So that would be a fascinating little case study to go back and to rewatch it with that eyesight in there.
Do you have any favorite shows that you feel like a majority of people don't get how deep they are?
Yeah, well, a lot of movies for sure. I was still to this day like a huge original Twin Peaks fan. I remember the first time and even just like, the depthness in like film and videography and like camera angles and lighting, and how that tells so much of a story. But I, like just any retelling of an old story, like all of even though the Disney kind of utilizes this to get like power and money, those stories are very, very deep when it comes to that internal aspect of our consciousness, and kind of that hero's journey and the completion of the self. But I would say Twin Peaks was one of
what Disney cartoon is one of your faves?
Yeah, I mean, Disney's really
or
important,
movie, whatever.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, I agree. It's like this huge, huge, huge evil. I mean, as much as like NASA or Hollywood out there for us,
yes,
but they're burying these same truths.
Exactly.
That I agree. Like, we got to be able to like almost like kind of move the curtain of the devil out of the way to see the angel behind it or something.
Yeah, and so like all of them kind of come in, and it's kind of unique with that one is they all kind of represent something a little bit different. Like, with like Peter Pan, you have the story of the individual who's going through the rites of passage, growing up from childhood to adulthood. And he doesn't want to make that transformation because, the only adult in his life is Captain Hook. And Captain Hook is this, this terrible, negative individual who's greedy. He lives by fear. So that's why he's king of the Lost Boys. It's because it's the boys that don't want to come up and they don't want to go through that rites of passage. Compared to like Wendy, who's ready to make that stance. And so you can kind of see the evolution of the rites of passage from Peter Pan having to make that transformation from adolescence into adulthood so he can actually create that framework of life. So that movie is very much about almost like your first Saturn returns and how important that is if you don't prepare for that and really kind of go through that constricting period in that life, you come out the other end without a foundation for the next 27 years of your life. So that one's great. And then, you have the idea of Sleeping Beauty, and that's the idea of like the overprotective parents and the individual that sacred feminine that is overprotected its entire life. So it doesn't have that masculine aspect of itself to protect the beautiful part of itself, that once something comes back that can kind of touch that beautiful self, the whole thing crumbles and they fall into this slumber. So that book and that story is all about, the activation of that divine masculine internally in yourself so you can protect the beauty of your sacred feminine. So you just kind of start making your way down. Pinocchio is all about cutting the strings in our life and going through that evolution to becoming, a real individual and a sovereign self. And even the new ones that I see, like my nieces and nephews watching, all the Pixar ones that come out, they all touch on these deep esoteric principles, the spoken word tradition. And again, these philosophies, we don't really see them in the books like the rites of passage, but we experience them in our lives. And we see other people going through them, and there's really no education given to how to grow up correctly. But if we look for these films and we look for these stories, we see that the pathway is there, and that's what actually attracts us to those stories. if we actually can, really, really, truly perceive what's kind of being presented for us. But all the old stories, all the great ones, like even the movies like Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, all these sci-fi fantasy movies, much deeper messages. Like, yeah, we love Gandalf, we love Chewbacca, and we love all these characters, but it's really what's pulling us into these films is these really deep messages, like, you know, I'm trying to think, like the Transformer, like the Michael Bay movies might have great explosions and stuff like that, but there's not that connection that people have with like an old Star Wars movie. And that's why the new Star Wars movies aren't hitting as deep anymore, because they've lost George Lucas, who was so connected to this perennial, hero's journey philosophy, and telling the stories of the archetypes, that even though they have all this technology and they can make all these explosions happen, the stories are not as special and relatable to us, because they're not talking about these core stories like we were talking about with Game of Thrones. And Game of Thrones was one of those shows that through quarantine I went back and watched. I was in a relationship, and the person was like, "You've never seen this story?" And I'm like, "No." And so because we were stuck in our houses for a little bit, we went through it, and I kind of watched that, and that was one that you picked up some really, really deep messages in there as well. And that kind of would come through that. So yeah, so many stories. I'm almost the Lego movie is a fantastic one actually as well. That's one of the most underestimated movies, I would say, because that will tell you everything about the hero's journey perfectly in a very simple way. But yeah, it's kind of funny to like watch a movie with me, because sometimes I just like will go off on a tangent, and people are like, why didn't you just watch the movie for the story, Daniel? Like, you should have just watched it for the story. I'm like, I know, I just get sucked into this.
I do too. I'm the same
Right?
way. I like all
I
the
think
layers.
uh-huh.
I want all the layers.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
I'll have to watch certain things by myself before I watch them with other people, just because I know I already see it, like just in the preview of something, that I'm like, I'm going to watch this different, and I want to be able to enjoy it on the levels I need to enjoy it.
Right.
I know I was thinking of something very specific with a movie and with Disney, Pixar, George Lucas, Hero's Journey, Lego movie. I know. I was like, I was thinking of the Batman and the Lego movie. It's weird to me that the deepest character of 2020, the deepest one, and we always got the hero our whole lives before, but the best character of the whole year was the Joker, where it was like the character study of the villain. And and really relatable, where he was the good guy all of a sudden, which I thought that was a very huge thing they did to us, where there was no more Iron Man, there was no more Batman, but the people started to think maybe Thanos was right. Maybe it's like this whole different idea was happening inside our brain, where we were relating to the villain for the first time, where I saw it happen, where I don't know if we ever did that before. I mean, there was always the, punk rock and roll idea of being bad, like running with the devil.
Anti-hero almost. Yeah.
There was always that idea, but you knew what you were doing. Never before was the like soccer mom, like, oh, poor Joker. Yeah, it was a very
you're right. You're so right. That had its own culture kind of before, and you would expect that from that culture, but you would never have seen it blend into these other ones. Yeah.
And that's kind of maybe almost the stuff that scares me the most, is the unintentional stuff we don't realize creep in. The stuff that maybe we give a soft spot in our heart to the stuff that shouldn't be the soft spot. The stuff we kind of fight against, the madness. And I think there's a crazy that you go in your spiritual awakening, but I do think it's very easy when you're vulnerable and open and you have no filters there. That's what your awakening is. Your like heart's busted open and ready to take anything in. Like you're saying, you don't go reaching in the dark and pull out angels. It's sometimes when we're all in this broken open spot, especially of trauma, which we all experienced together collectively over the last year. they knew that was going to happen to us. So they're trying to put new stuff in us. They're trying to put new ideas and new details and new roadblocks because they knew collectively, where we go one, we go all. I wake up, you heal, I heal. And they knew this is happening on a big, huge scale. And these big ideas that we don't even realize are in there of like, poor Joker. I don't know. Maybe I mean, it just seems so simple, but it's everybody hates Batman now. And that's crazy. I don't know. It's just weird. Everybody hates Superman now. When were we in a place that people could be like, maybe Thanos was right. Maybe we should destroy, a third of the population of the universe. And then everything will be better. There'll be enough resources for everyone to go around. Just instead of the idea of having all the power and just creating more resources.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Which is so funny. Yeah, and again, they're going to use that magic wand either which way they can to kind of push that agenda. And and you're right, they're kind of just implanting it in everybody's minds at this point. We're getting that identification where it's just like, oh, well, maybe the population is too large, and we should reduce the population, and then you like bring up the aspect of like, well, the whole world can fit in the state of Texas with like living space, and that kind of throws off like that whole idea. So it's just, you could just see this whole, how the Great Reset has been, that information that's in that has been pushed and been, has been put in front of our eyes through media for the last 10, 15 years, getting us comfortable with that idea before they even introduce it, to where we're like, oh, I think I've seen this before. And you're like, oh yeah, it's been all the Marvel movies, or it's been all these movies back there. So yeah, it's just it's a powerful thing, film, media, you're tapping into somebody's consciousness directly with sound, visuals, and feelings. So you're really, if we're all creators, you're taking part in somebody else's creation, and it's creating within yourself. So it's a huge tool. So I think we need to be a little bit more aware of when we're filtering in the experiences that we put our consciousness through.
Yeah, like just because you don't believe in magic doesn't mean it's not being used on you every day.
Right.
Like it doesn't matter whether or not you believe in it. It doesn't matter whether or not you believe in it. It doesn't matter or not whether or not you feel the dark force. Somebody else is paying homage to that dark force.
Yes.
Like it is weird shit going on. And I think to be at a place now where I feel like I know so much more than I ever have, and I now realize how little I know. That is a place that I think everyone needs to be at. If you think you have all the answers, you are so far away from knowing anything. And your TV is not going to tell you it. If the books are allowed to get through and still be published and not be sent, if you look at the publishing houses on a lot of your books now, they're from China. And you're like, what? It's like, yeah, it was sent through Los Angeles or sent through New York, but the publishing house is in China. So if we're all under this new, we can call it like things patriotism or communism or capitalism or socialism, but whatever, it's somebody's magic, and it's coming out of one part of the world right now, and it's being directed and taken over another part of the world. And yeah, I think people need to pay attention to the smallest level of, an apple isn't an apple anymore. You look at the ingredients of an apple and it's like triazama gluten-free apple is the second ingredient. It's like, what are even the smallest scale? What's in everything? What are you doing? It all matters. It's intention.
It's all intention. Absolutely. It's so funny too. Like you talk to a younger individual, you ask them what Amazon is, you could say the Amazon, and they're like, the Amazon. They're like, oh, it's the store, and you're like, no, it's actually the rainforest that produces the oxygen for this entire earth, and it's just like, even like when you talk about Apple, like when people say Apple now, the first thing that comes to their mind is their phone before this fruit. Not only a fruit, but a fruit of biblical significance, like a very deep idea in our consciousness.
Tesla.
Tesla, that's the best example in the world. That is the best one. How that is the
right in front of our face. We've watched that happen.
Right in front of our face. And it's like we couldn't make enough noise about it, because it was right when Tesla was actually starting to get, and this is how it happens. This is how they control that point of philosophy, because he was just starting to get steam online, and more people were like starting to hear about the Tesla Edison debate and really starting to see that history behind it. And it was just like they tapped into that. They knew we were going to learn about Tesla. They knew we were going to learn about free energy. And then all of a sudden, it's a luxury electric car that's really out of majority of your guys' tax brackets. Everything Tesla would have been against.
And created by your tax dollars.
Yes.
Everything he has, every bit of wealth that he has is all from your tax money and subsidies given to his company under the guise of clean energy.
Mm-hmm.
And then he did the same thing with the space program. It's like he's a really, and now he's the richest person on the planet. I think he's the biggest, he's a very scary individual. And the fact that some people see him as a white hat, in my opinion, makes him more dangerous than Bezos or Gates.
Right, because we've seen those guys' cards. I'm worried about the cards I can't see. Yeah, again, if somebody's getting on TV right now, somebody's getting any kind of information, they have to be in such that small polarity that we talked about. And so there's nothing that's going to come out of that polarity that's going to expand it. It's only going to harvest that energy. So
I love your example of polarity today, by the way. Even just putting your two fingers up and seeing it like a pole of even how I meditate sometimes. I have this silver chain around my neck, and I have this like, one day I'm going to light this chain up. Like I'm going to meditate with it and light it up. And but just seeing like everything, like their goal is to push those two phone poles so close together that the wire that's needed is so tiny they can just control it at every aspect. And our goal is to spread those two phone poles as far out as we can, so the wire between them is so fucking long they can't control any of it.
Right.
Almost like
I love it.
But you did it with your fingers, and I always forget that I get to enjoy like the visual, and then I'm like, oh yeah, like it was a good representation of just this easy way to explain it, of them moving close and far apart.
That's so funny, and that's what I do love about these video conversations that we've got to have, because I talk with my hands. It's that Italian thing. I talk with my hands all the time.
Italian.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny because when we're doing the podcast, we don't video, we don't record it videoly, but when we're doing the podcast, I'm always just talking to my head and with my hands, and my partner in the podcast, Eduardo, is always just laughing at me, because I'm always like making examples with my hands. And it's not until like afterwards when I was talking with my hands like the whole time. He's like, oh yeah, the whole time you were talking with your hands. He's like, nobody can see it, but you were just like making all these examples. So it's just something I naturally do. It's kind of a funny thing, but
there's a magic in it. There's always magic in movement. It controls energy, chi, you can play with it. And so I think it's really funny how many certain cultures just are more expressive with their hands or their movements. Like Italians are super hand oriented, where like a lot of like Southern cultures will use their whole body. They'll get out of their chair if you make them laugh. It's like a whole, and I like that expression of energy sometimes. Where it's the same as our smile and how important it is to not cover our face with a mask.
It's 100%. I couldn't.
Do you have anything that you want to leave people with? And of course, tell everyone where to find you.
Yeah. Oh, well, the which I always love. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for having me and being able to share this conversation.
I love this. I hope you'll come back and hang out with me.
All the time.
Like, okay, perfect.
All the time.
I think you're so wonderful, and your vibe, like the way you make me feel, is amazing. And I know I'm going to leave this with so many thoughts that will just keep me spinning. Like I love feeding my brain things and then getting my heart to understand it. It's like,
it's such a beautiful process. So yeah, and that's 100%. I completely resonate the same. But I think always the best message to kind of leave with is just, as we all kind of are going through this development, as we're all working on ourselves and developing our characters, we live in such an interesting time. I think it's really important to be grateful for the progress you have made on yourself, and you've made as a community and how you've kind of grown through these whole experiences. And it's going to take our growth as individuals that's really going to make these changes happen that we've kind of discussed and what we're all kind of moving towards. So it's just it's such an honor to be on the journey with yourself and all of the individuals that are listening. So it's just such an honor to be on this journey, and would love to have more conversations with you. If you are interested in any past conversations that I've had, you can find me at Know Thyself Podcast. So that's knowthyselfpodcast.org. But you can also find us on all the podcast apps. I'm terrible with technology, but somehow I figured out how to get them on like majority of them. So we're pretty proud of me there. But it's a great conversation about anything esoteric or occult. So we really look at alchemy, astrology, the tarot, really just natural law and the development of our own character, development of selves. We look at all religions, all cultures, and it's really just this open conversation of sharing.
And you make it all beautiful. The one thing I like
fantastic.
about your show, so it never takes a side where you're trying to put down any religion. It never takes a side where you're really just trying to like belittle it or make somebody feel foolish for believing in a way. You really have this way of all-inclusive kind of wrapping them together and speaking through all of them. It's really, really wonderfully done.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for that. And that's amazing. And that's exactly what we're doing. Through this spiritual understanding, we've really understood that there's a common language. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with the podcast, is make this common language. So we're all talking about the same thing in our own spiritual communities and our own kind of like higher thought communities, but we might be using different words, but we're kind of all stressing the same concept. So kind of unifying that and getting a common language so we can all more easily communicate across groups and see that we're all actually kind of working on the same thing, I think is going to be very powerful. So again, I am so blessed to be able to enjoy this beautiful morning, having this conversation with you. This was so great.
Well, thanks for coming, Daniel. I look forward to our next hangout, and thanks you guys for listening. Bye.
Bye.
So she has been Cheney, and now she's off to smoke a blunt. See you next Tuesday, you fucking cunts.